Well, welcome to Actual Faith. I'm your host, Jeremy Scott DeSpain, and I'm so thankful that you're watching with us today. This is a channel that is committed to building the faith of Christians through a biblical worldview, and I'm with Dr. Phil Fernandes today. He's really a local godfather of Christian apologetics, I'd like to say. He's the pastor of Trinity Bible Fellowship and the president of the Institute of Biblical Defense out here in the greater Seattle area. And he teaches world religions, theology, and apologetics for Crosspoint Academy. And I'm thankful that he's here. He's a friend, and I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have today. Thank you for joining me today, Dr. Fernandes.
How you doing, Jeremy?
Doing good. So before we get started, why don't you just let everyone know where we can find out more about you?
Yeah, probably philfernandes.org, and Fernandes ends with an S, not a Z.
Okay, great.
philfernandes.org. And if you want to listen to my sermons and lectures and debates, we have over 1,800 on sermon audio. You can just click the link to sermon audio right above my photo on the web page there. So
that's great. And I say that he is the godfather of apologetics, or a godfather of Christian apologetics, because I know that you have rubbed shoulders with Josh McDowell as well as his son Sean, and you've put out books for a number of years now and been a part of conferences. And so I'm thankful that I have the opportunity to talk with you today and really just discuss our topic, which is atheism. So we're going to talk a little bit more about atheism, but specifically about new atheism. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're going to learn a little bit more about this term, new atheism, today. We will talk about some things that are common with atheism generally, but we're going to zero in on this. Phil is the author of the book, The Atheist Delusion, and he really gives this robust defense of Christianity while responding to popular atheists. So what we're going to do is, first of all, before we get into this, I want to encourage you, if you're watching this right now, to take a moment. Would you subscribe to this channel if you like the content that you're seeing? Like it, share it with somebody. I think it'll be a help to them. Not only is this a channel on YouTube, but I also post this as a podcast and try to make it available. So if you don't mind spreading the word, it would be very helpful to this ministry and for the furtherance of the gospel. And hey, even if you're not a believer, the point of these conversations on Faith Discourse in my Actual Faith channel is really just to help people be exposed to beliefs, as well as understanding how we get to belief, why we as Christians believe what we believe, and then also hear stories of even those that are unbelievers. Words like deconstructionism are going all around today. It's a very popular word. We ought to have good reason for why we believe what we believe, regardless of the belief. And so that's really the purpose here of our time together. And today we're going to just talk a little more about atheism. So as we get started here, some may have heard of the term new atheism floating around over really the last 10 to 15 years. What does it mean? And is it still prevalent today? Are there any names that would associate with that group, the new atheist?
Basically, it's the same atheism as before, but it's more impatient and more militant. Some try to actually date, when did the new atheism come into existence? And the best answer I've heard is that on September 11th, 2001, when the Islamic terrorists hijacked our planes and took down the Twin Towers and killed thousands of Americans, at that point, some of the leading popular atheists began to get real angry. And, most Christians would not look at 9/11 as a black mark on the history of Christianity. This was done by Muslims, and we proclaim that the Muslim faith is a false religion. But in the mind of the atheists, they group Muslims and Christians together often because we both believe in one God. And we believe that the morality that comes from this one God is the absolute universal morality. And so basically, these new atheists saw 9/11 as just one more black mark against Christianity and anybody who believes in God. And their impatience came out. And they acted like, well, Christianity is the cause. Belief in God is the cause of all the problems in the world, and therefore we have to basically, crush it. Whether that means abolishing it, outlawing it, but let's stop pretending that these Christians are smart, moral human beings. They're the cause of all our problems. Let's rid the earth of them. And so it was a more militant, impatient, frustrated atheism. It's like, we've been spending hundreds of years trying to refute these guys in a respectful manner. Let's just be done with them. And it's that kind of attitude.
So, who are some of these atheists that have been popularizing this view over the last 10 years or so?
Well, who are some of them?
Yeah.
Christopher Hitchens was probably the biggest one. He wrote "God is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything." He passed away from cancer, and he did befriend several of the Christians he was debating in his last few years. So there's no evidence of a deathbed conversion. We can pray that happened, but there's no evidence that it happened. But Christopher Hitchens, with his British accent, was very articulate. But when you search his book, God is Not Great, you don't really find arguments against God. You just find, I don't like God, I don't like God, I don't like God. I think God is immoral and evil. And Richard Dawkins is still alive. He's probably the leading voice. I think Daniel Dennett was another one. And there used to be the Four Horsemen. Oh, and the younger guy, Sam Harris.
Yeah.
And but it seems like Harris seems to be moving towards Buddhism. And Richard Dawkins doesn't speak as much as he used to, because many of the conferences he spoke at are going woke. And, Richard Dawkins is an old Enlightenment rationalist type of atheist. And in postmodern neo-Marxist woke critical race theory circles, there's really no place for Richard Dawkins. He's, someone of white privilege or whatever. So there's a kind of a crumpling of this movement right now. And but whatever the case, Richard Dawkins' book, The Dawkins Delusion, The God Delusion. I think Alistair McGrath wrote a book, The Dawkins Delusion, refuting him. I wrote The Atheist Delusion, and in refutation of Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. But Dawkins, in his work, that's where he talks about teaching children about God as child abuse. So if your church has a children's church or Sunday school, you're a child abuser. The church I pastor, child abusers. The school I teach at, child abusers. Now, these guys are like the thinkers. They don't tell you what to do. They just tell you how they think it is. So they're hoping for others to take the next step and outlaw Christianity, outlaw teaching children about God and things of that sort. But the new atheist is the same old atheism, maybe not as philosophically sophisticated as the atheism of a Bertrand Russell or a Dr. Michael Martin from Boston University, but more of a pop atheism that is very militant towards Christianity and wants some action to be taken.
So you mentioned child abuse just a moment ago, which that's a serious claim. That's not just a word or a phrase that we throw around. We shouldn't just tag on abuse to something we don't like. I mean, what are some reasons why? I mean, what would make the difference between, say, a Christian educating their children in their beliefs, which we know that beliefs are often tied to cultural norms. Worldwide, that could be the case. I mean, to be a Muslim is also to be, Islamic, to practice that religion. So how do they jump from teaching your children, say, beliefs and religion? And as you mentioned, I agree with you in the very beginning that it's too bad, because atheists, when they want to be critical, all they have to do is be critical of religion. And they just have to find something critical of, say, a false religion that we would be just as critical on in the area of Christian apologetics. You know, we would agree there's many things wrong with what we would call Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses, or various religions that, I mean, even denominations within what would be called, quote, evangelical Christianity. We should always be open to criticism. I think the point of this channel, and when we talk about Christian apologetics, is we want to cut to the truth. Like, what is the truth? And we care about that. But when we talk about child abuse, why is it that they get to teach their children, and for some reason they feel that naturally, in a naturalistic worldview, that children will just grow up without any inclination of God? Any thoughts there? It boggles my mind sometimes.
Yeah, again, they try to just clump together all monotheists and are teaching, whether it's Christians, Muslims, or Jews, are teaching that, hey, there's only one true morality, and that comes from God. And they see that it's very narrow-minded, but they act as if, I'm not really sure if they deep down inside really believe it. I think they just, they claim they don't believe in God, but they're really, really angry at him. And because they're angry at God, I think their emotions just override their intellect. Because I have a hard time thinking that they really think that if Christians teach their children about God, which is what we've been doing for 2,000 years, our kids will automatically grow up to be terrorists like the Islamic fundamentalists who, hijacked our planes and flew them into the Twin Towers. And they look at history and they only view Christianity from the bad that it did. Now, Christianity is not just what God did, the perfect God, but it's also imperfect people coming to Christ, and God's still at work in us. So Christianity is not perfect. The Christendom, the history of Christianity, is not a perfect history. The Crusades weren't as bad as these guys are claiming, because we kind of turned the other cheek with Muslim invaders for a couple hundred years before, quote unquote, Christian nations, which were actually Roman Catholic nations, decided to fight back against the Muslims and against Muslim, Islamic violence. But the Inquisition, I mean, there's no way to justify torturing people who don't share your beliefs and things of that sort. But they kind of very selective in what they pick out of history. So they'll ignore that Christianity started the orphanages and the hospitals, and Christianity built the schools and the universities. I mean, Princeton, Yale, Harvard, they were all Christian schools at their inception, when they began. So they're very selective about the way they view history. So I think it starts out with a subconscious hatred of God, just as Paul in Romans 1, he doesn't say that the atheists reject God due to lack of knowledge. Deep down inside, they know God exists, so they don't have any excuse, but they suppress that truth because they're ungrateful. So atheists are not like, atheists think Christians are like a 12-year-old kid who still believes in Santa Claus. That's not the way it is. The way it is atheists are the 12-year-old kids who open up their gifts at Christmas, know it's not from Santa, know it's from their parents, and they fall in love with the gift, but they're not thankful. They're not grateful to the gift giver. And that's what an atheist is. He's not thankful to God. He's not grateful to God. He loves the creation, but doesn't want anything to do with the creator. And so that suppressed hatred of God. Paul Vitz was a Freudian psychologist who was Roman Catholic. and taught at, I think it was NYU, but he said that Freud got it wrong. It's not the Christians who create God through wishful thinking, it's the atheists who hate the father image. And first, Witz shows that the very first generation of militant atheists, their parents weren't atheists, but they were, without fail, these guys had either no relationship with their dad or a bad relationship with their dad. And their father was the first authority figure that they saw. So they became very anti-authoritarian. So like the Friedrich Nietzsche's, the Sigmund Freud himself, it's a desire to kill the father image if you're going to use Freudian psychology to psychoanalyze Freud. So whatever the case, I think there's subconsciously there's this hatred towards God. So then they go into history and they only allow Christianity to have a bad impact on history. They ignore all the good that Christianity did. And, they act like in America, they act like America and Christianity invented slavery. No, Western civilization inherited slavery. We phased it out just by the spreading of the gospel. Then it made a comeback under Islamic sale of human beings, and through the pirates and the slave trade. But then once again, when Western civilization came of age, it abolished slavery. So slavery is still alive and well in any countries that have never been impacted by the Christian worldview. And so instead of applauding Christianity for opposing slavery and using biblical principles to combat slavery, all the abolitionist movements in America and Great Britain were founded by Bible-believing Christians. Instead of crediting Christianity with abolishing slavery, they do a revisionist history that acts like Christianity led to slavery. Christianity led to all the world's wars. I don't remember who the scholars were. I remember Lenny Esposito, the Christian apologist, gave an excellent lecture showing what a small percentage of wars were actually fought for religious reasons. More times than not, it was a boundary dispute or hatred between nations, and was fought for political reasons. And every once in a while, the leaders claimed that there was some kind of religious reason to try to get the people motivated about it. But in reality, Christianity is not the cause of all the world's problems. Christianity, more times than not, is the solution to our problems. Although not all people who claim to be Christians are true Christians. And that's another thing with the new atheists. They lump all Christians together as if there was never a Protestant Reformation, like we all answer to the Bishop of Rome. And obviously, Protestant Christians have a lot of problems with Roman Catholicism and the idea of papal infallibility. Yet we're grouped together in the mistakes that the Roman Catholic Church has made throughout the centuries.
Yeah, when I think about belief, atheists are scared of that word. They want to eliminate it from their vocabulary because once you believe in something, they want to associate it with a religion or some sort of what we would call worldview to make it broader. They seem to make this definition that atheism is just simply a lack of belief. So Dawkins seems to think that there's just no justification for believing God over any other fairy tale creature, or, he's famous for popularizing the flying spaghetti monster. Just nonsense. So how do they simply believe that they have a lack of belief? It just seems counterproductive. And I don't know where it's going other than they just know logically, once they start believing something, that they're held accountable to the same rules that they apply to those who practice religion of any sort.
Yeah, there's several things going on there. One is just a little cheating going on because if you don't have a belief to defend and by the rules of debate, you don't have to defend anything. You can just keep attacking the other person's worldview. And that's why I accused Michael Martin, who was America's leading philosophical atheist, a Boston University professor, the author of Atheism, a philosophical justification. He died a few years back, and we became friends over the years. But I told him, you atheists live in a glass house, but they never give out their address because they're throwing rocks at everybody else's house. And so they attack the Christian worldview. But when you ask them, well, do you believe in absolute moral laws? Well, that's not part of this debate. I don't know. Who knows? And they never tell you what they really believe. So you can't come at them. So they try to. So number one, it's like by redefining atheism as the lack of belief, because atheism comes from atheos, no God. Atheism historically is the belief that there is no God. So there's a worldview there. There's something that they need to defend, but they don't want to have to defend it. So they just make the unethical move and just say, well, we just lack belief. Only you have to defend your beliefs. I'm just going to stand up and during this 2-hour debate and just throw rocks at your house. And but I'm not going to give you my address. The other thing is they don't want to acknowledge, maybe they don't realize it consciously, but atheism is dead. Atheism as a worldview is dead. Friedrich Nietzsche had no problem believing there is no God. He died in 1900. Now, in the 1920s, when we discovered the expansion of the universe, and that led to Big Bang cosmology, we realized that the universe had a beginning. And whatever has a beginning needs a cause. Well, that's coming pretty close to, if you're trying to find the cause of the universe, a cause for all of nature. You've run out of natural causes. Now you need a supernatural cause. So that's a little too close to comfort for the atheist. So rather than, like with Friedrich Nietzsche, he believed the universe doesn't need a cause because it didn't have a beginning. Now atheists believe the universe had a beginning, yet it doesn't need a cause. Well, that's pretty tough to defend. And so now even guys like Richard Dawkins acknowledges that it's hypothetically possible that God exists, that even evil doesn't necessarily disprove God's existence. So in the Expelled movie with Ben Stein, he acknowledged it's possible that God exists, but he thinks it's highly improbable. But whatever the case, Bertrand Russell, 1948, when he debated Frederick Copleston on the British Broadcasting Channel, on God's existence, Frederick Copleston asked Bertrand Russell, what would you classify yourself as? And he said, I'm basically an agnostic. So even in the late 1940s, there were already the world's leading atheist was saying, I'm not really an atheist, I'm an agnostic. I just have no knowledge of God, and I don't think anybody has knowledge of God. So basically what we've done is atheism is dead, because we now know the universe had a beginning. Whatever has a beginning needs a cause. So the idea that we can prove with certainty that God doesn't exist, that God definitely doesn't exist, that's, you'd have to be God to disprove God. You'd have to be omnipresent to search the whole universe, physical, visible and invisible, the entire realm of reality, to see that there's no God. And so you'd have to be God to disprove God. So they backed off and they said, well, God probably doesn't exist, and we lack belief in God. We don't believe man can have knowledge about God, but that's really agnosticism. And so what they are is really, they're officially hard agnostics, but in reality, true atheism is dead, and they just don't want to admit it. So in Michael Martin's book, Atheism, a Philosophical Justification, he wrote it in 1991, and he had an entire appendix dedicated to that, where atheism is not the positive belief there is no God, but instead atheism is the lack of belief in God, and therefore Christians have the burden of proof, not the atheist.
One thing that is also kind of being talked about really in the last 5 years, I've seen it come up quite a bit, especially the last couple of years. We've gone through the pandemic, and we hear a lot about follow the science. And I know just as well as you do, you have an appreciation for science. You love science. I love science. And it seems like atheists have pitted science against religion, and this idea that science has disproved God, and it really drives a wedge between science and religion. So what do you think? Is that like a false dichotomy? Is there anything real there? Give me
Yeah,
some thoughts on that.
all the branches of modern science were founded by Bible believing Christians. So, and it's because Christians believe that a rational God created the universe in a rational way and created human beings in his image. So we're rational, so that we could find truth about the world in which we live. The ancient Greeks, when they did philosophy, they never had that guarantee. It was always possible that what their reason was telling them, what their senses were telling them, just wasn't true. It was all absurd. It was all a game. But with the Christian worldview, it gave a reason, a foundation for modern science. So the idea that science disproves God, and faith in God and belief in science are irreconcilable or are mutually exclusive is just really not the case. So, in fact, when it comes to like evolution, evolutionists have never proven how something could come from nothing, how life could come from non-life, how multi-celled animals could come from single-celled animals, how animals with backbones can come from animals without backbones, how reptiles could evolve into birds because they have totally different design for the lungs. So all the things that Christians reject, evolutionists haven't proven, they've just assumed. Now, evolutionists have proved gradual change within major kinds of creatures, but that's perfectly consistent within the Christian worldview. Evolutionists can show that Chihuahuas and Great Danes are related, and the variety of different kinds of dogs, but they can't show us a dog evolving into a non-dog. So it's not what science has proven that differs from belief in God. It's what many scientists have assumed. And so we can look at the same scientific data, the arm of a man, the arm of an ape, the wing of a bird, the fin of a shark, and we could say, well, that's common anatomy. But the atheist says common anatomy, therefore common ancestry. No, the Christian would say, no, common designer. The same God who designed them designed us. So there really isn't this big debate between religion and science. Is just, and then this has become, when people assume that it is, it's become what J.P. Moreland calls scientism, turning science into a religion. And C.S. Lewis warned us about this in The Abolition of Man in the 1940s. He said that if we reject God's moral laws, we eventually the line between magic and science is very small, because both try to control nature. But one is based on truth. It's a truth-finding enterprise. The other's in the world of the occult. And he said, and superstition. But once you detach science from God, then there really is no difference between science and magic. And so the world's leading scientists can disagree with, like, Anthony Fauci, and it doesn't matter. You just censor them. If they're not politically correct, if it's not the political narrative, you just censor them. And I'm not saying Fauci's wrong and they're right. I'm just saying in a free country, we get to hear both sides, since both sides are coming from some of the world's leading scientists in their field. But C.S. Lewis warned that science and even education would be used as weapons in the hands of a godless state, and this would abolish mankind, and the few would control the billions in what C.S. Lewis called the man molders of the new age. And I think that's what we're seeing now, and I'd like to see more apologists do that C.S. Lewis type work and take on what I call the deification of the state. And so once you throw God out of the debate, I mean, nobody's arguing all men have evolved equally. We said all men are created equal, created in God's image and equal in the eyes of God, and therefore deserving of equal rights and equal treatment by the law. No atheist has argued all men have evolved equally, and so the floodgates for all sorts of evils are going to be unleashed, just as they were in ancient pagan times. In these current neo-pagan times, we're going to see that occur. Unfortunately, with the technology we have today, the result is going to be far more deadly than it was in ancient times.
Yeah, you know, the reason why I spend some time even talking to atheists, I spoke to the Godless Engineer, John Gleason, on my channel as well. We did an interview together, and he was very kind. He was open,
Good.
just had great conversation, and he may even watch this later. I don't know, but John, if you're watching, you know, or any other atheist for that fact, or somebody that's just riding the fence on belief. One of the reasons why I want to have conversations like this, number one, I'm always open to criticism. If we get a view wrong, you know, we want to talk about it. As you mentioned, in a society, though, right now where it seems like cancel culture is prevalent, it's so hard to even get a conversation in without feeling like you're going to be responded to, or it's a one-way conversation. In fact, what's popular today, I've even played with it on my channel. I don't know if I'm too great at it, are response videos. You know, people want a response or even live reaction to certain things. All of these really excite us because we don't have to have live conversation. All we need to do is give our opinion and then jump off the channel.
Yeah.
But when we think about these things, I want to engage with people of other beliefs. I did not grow up in a Christian home. And I say that loosely. My parents, they believed in God, but we just didn't go to church regularly. We didn't have family devotion. So probably like the average American Christian, so to speak, just real nominal. But I will say I'm thankful. You know, my parents, as much as they knew, you know, they led me in that direction. And same with grandparents. But really, the origin of my belief started developing in my late teen years, even on into college. So I know that this is something that we certainly go through a journey in our life, or sometimes are Christians and then walk backwards depending on some things. So, you know, by definition, most atheists that I meet, you know, they believe purely in natural causes. But isn't it kind of futile to talk to them about God or the supernatural realm if that's where they're at? Because I see some atheists, I mean, their whole channel is devoted to, is there evidence for God? And it seems that no shred of evidence, because it's in the supernatural realm, will ever suffice. I don't know. I mean, what would you have to say about that?
Yeah, well, it's if you're going to rule the supernatural out at the start, then you're not going to be open to believing about God. That's what when I debated the Australian, was it Dr. Mark Fulton, on the resurrection. I asked him how much historical evidence would you need to see before you'd believe that Jesus rose from the dead? He said, but at first I asked him, do you believe in miracles? He said, no, I'm an atheist. And so I said, well, how much evidence would you need to see to believe that Jesus rose from the dead? He said, I would never believe Jesus rose from the dead. So I said, so no matter how much historical evidence there is for the resurrection, you're still going to reject it. And he said, right. And then I said, well, then why in the world are you even taking this debate? But yeah, if they're closed to it, there's not much you could do. What I would say, though, is when I debate atheists, I'm not trying to convert the atheists. Like when I debate an atheist on college campuses, there's people in the crowd who are open. And so I'm trying to reach them. Then if I could befriend the atheist that I've debated, the late Michael Martin, because both he and I were former Marines, we got along real well. Eddie Tabash, I think he's a great guy. He was a lawyer from the Clinton administration. I debated him at Washington State University. We're friends. I mean, it's hard to keep in touch when you're busy guys, and we are. But Jeffrey J. Louder, good friends with him. Doug Kruger, I debated him. He likes MMA. I'm a former boxer, so So we got along real well too. Dan Barker, not so much. I didn't get along well with him at all. But there's a lot of these atheists you can befriend. Now, I wrote an article witnessing to atheists. I was contacted by the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association about 15 years ago, and they asked me to write an article on witnessing to atheists. And so I wrote the article, had to write it overnight, and it's a long time ago. I think it's still on the internet. I don't navigate the internet very well. I don't surf very well, but whatever the case, I argue there that the best things you can do is pray for them, befriend them, spend time with them, go out for a cup of coffee with them, and really build that relationship, and then respect their views and listen to them and all, and also share your views, share evidence for faith. But in the end, the problem is not of the mind, the problem is of the heart. And but I think we need to build relationships with people. And sometimes when the chips are down and they're abandoned by their friends, and then they realize the only people standing there by their side are Christians, sometimes it takes that extreme before they'll even consider God. Anthony Flew was the world's leading atheist. He debated my old professor Gary Habermas at least 3 times on the resurrection, and Habermas demolished him all 3 times. But in a debate, he debated William Lane Craig on the 50-year anniversary of the Copleston-Bertrand Russell debate. So that was back in 1998. He debated William Lane Craig, and Craig argued for God's existence. And so the next event, big event that Anthony Flew showed up at, he announced he was a theist. Mm-hmm. He now believes that a God exists, but he's not ready to believe in a revelatory God, a God who revealed himself. Mm. But he said if he did, he would become a Christian because of the intellect of Paul and the charisma of Jesus. And it's interesting, his book, There Is a God, Anthony Flew explaining how he came to God, he actually had N.T. Wright, a fellow Brit, write a chapter on evidence for Jesus' resurrection. And so I thought that was rather interesting. But as far as we know, he died as a monotheist and didn't convert to Christianity. I hope he did in his dying breath. But at least I knew he was considering, could not refute the idea, the evidence for the resurrection. But Richard Dawkins, they were both Oxford scholars, and he said that Anthony Flew was just probably suffering from dementia or something. Mm. So Anthony Flew presented a paper arguing, I believe it was at Oxford, that Richard Dawkins, his argumentation is not academically or intellectually stimulating, and he's an embarrassment, and he needs to be removed. And within months, Richard Dawkins resigned from his position in Oxford. Now, maybe it's because he was making so money writing books, slamming Christians and debating Christians, or maybe they asked him to resign or be fired. I don't know, but it does seem rather coincidental. By the way, you mentioned he compares belief in God to the belief in the flying spaghetti monster. That's a really bad analogy. Richard Dawkins has not made a dime lecturing on college campuses or debating or writing books refuting the existence of the flying spaghetti monster. There are not over 2 billion people on the planet Earth who profess faith in the flying spaghetti monster. Whereas the God of Christianity, you have over 2 billion people who profess faith in the God of Christianity. You have another 1.3 billion monotheists who are Muslims. And so you got pretty much half the world's population believes in a monotheistic God. Probably closer to 85 to 90% of people in the world believe in some type of God. So I don't see the flying spaghetti monster. Thomas Aquinas can make really good arguments that if finite beings exist, there must exist infinite being to ground their existence. But infinite being, by definition, must have all possible perfections and must have every possible perfection to an infinite degree. Therefore, the infinite being must be omnipresent because he's not limited by space, must be all good because he's not limited by evil, must be immaterial because he's not limited by matter. And the list goes on, and you have the same attributes as spelled out in the scriptures. So whatever the case, I don't see that kind of philosophical argumentation using even Aristotelian philosophy is what Aquinas at least started with. And I don't see the brilliance of Aristotle ever arguing for the existence of the flying spaghetti monster. So I'm just not sure we should take Richard Dawkins seriously. I was told when I debated Eddie Tabashi at Wazoo, the atheist organization there told me, the leaders of that organization, they asked me who else would I like to debate, and I said Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins, and they said we can't afford Christopher Hitchens, and I said, well, why not Dawkins? And they said we're embarrassed by his argumentation. So he's not even respected in some other some atheist circles academically. So,
well, there's a couple things I would just like to encourage people that are listening, both believers in Christ and non-believers or atheists. I would say that, number one, learn from each other. Learn from each other, because some of the brightest minds still have something to contribute to the conversation, and you can still learn from people regardless. I think that statements such as, religion poisons society, or, science has disproven God. When we make dogmatic statements on both sides of the aisle and we don't leave room to learn, then what happens is sometimes I think atheists feel like they have to trade everything for something else, whatever that looks like. Now, you're definitely coming to Christ, but Christ may not be who he has been presented to you. I mean, we are imperfect people. You said in the beginning, it was a very profound statement, is that, we're imperfect people trying to project a perfect God and his word. So, unfortunately, my testimony hasn't always been what it should. And, I'm not infallible. So that's something that we can learn from, is recognize that I can shed some things off of me to learn from somebody else, and they can hopefully from Christianity, and realize that, I grew up in a very evangelistic background. If you didn't get a conversion at the doorstep, then you just need to work on your soul winning, whereas sometimes it takes years, and sometimes it's here a little, there a little. It's loving on people, and it's them loving on you, and recognizing that, I hold the belief, I know you do as well, that kind of Francis Schaeffer quote, that all truth is God's truth.
Yep.
So wherever we mine it, whatever conversation it comes from, let's try to find the origin of it. And I just happen to believe the more we talk about truth, we'll find God, there.
Yeah.
He's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, so to speak, So I think just continue talking about truth. You will find God,
And I think just really building relationships with others. The statement's kind of corny, but it's true that we're often the only Jesus people will ever see. And I'm getting ready to preach on Colossians chapter 1 with his great mystery, Christ in you. Well, if people are trying to deny Christ, it's going to be more difficult if they see Christ in us.
That's good.
But that's not always the case. We're often, too much of us and not enough of the Lord in our lives. And but building the relationships, and it is so difficult in a computer age where everybody thinks that their social media friends are their real friends, and trying to build relationships with people who've been depersonalized. But if we can just love on people, they can deny God, but they cannot deny the love that you shared with them.
Yes.
Hopefully they'll make the connection and realize that we love because he first loved us.
That's good. Well, thank you, Dr. Phil Fernandes, for joining me today on today's episode discussing atheism, new atheism. And I'm thankful that we've had an opportunity to unpack it really, just a survey of some of the common beliefs, some of the things that we hear, but we need clarification of. I would encourage you, I will provide a link in the description to Dr. Phil Fernandez's website with lectures as well as books that he's written. And I hope that you'll listen to some of his material. He also has a YouTube channel, Phil Fernandes. You'll see his name on the screen there. Check that out, subscribe to his channel. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Actual Faith, this channel. Share, like this, let people know about it. Re-listen to this episode. Really try to understand these things and read his book, The Atheist Delusion. It will be a help to you. It really begins showing a defense of the Christian faith. Today, what we discussed was really within the first chapter or two, unpacking a survey of some of the common sayings of atheists or claims that they make. And then he goes into a biblical defense of Christianity. So it'll be a real help to you. And I would encourage you to take a look at that. So again, thank you, Phil, for joining us today. And remember that actual faith is not a blind leap of ignorance into darkness, but that actual faith is trusting and believing the unknown because of the known. Thank you so much.